What is up, Noel Nation? It's the guys from Plant the Spear. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. Michael, we got a whole bunch of little things to talk about. I mean, it's the off season. The news has kind of been a little bit slow, but there's a lot of little tea leaves here and there that I think would make for a good show, just to kind of touch on a lot of things. Because really, more than anything, that lawsuit update seems to be it's getting a little fierce out here now. It's getting pretty competitive.
Getting a little heavy.
You had like the ACC preemptively struck, Florida State struck back. The ACC came back again. Florida State's like, hold up, you talk about my mama now. And, and they started naming names. And
they started naming names.
Right. Yeah. Like they took the kid gloves off. So we're going to touch on some updates there. There really hasn't been like any legal changes. It's just kind of everybody just paperwork trails going back and forth,
basically.
But there's some interesting things that we're going to touch on that. Then we're going to talk about some of the just stadium developments that's going on. There's ongoing construction. There's rumors about when the spring game is going to be. We'll talk about that as well. And then it's just a few other things. So we will jump right in, guys. But first off, Michael, how are you, my friend? Thank you for joining me.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks for having me again. Man, doing great. It's the summer / spring. It's the whole off season. Off season is just not as fun because you're trying to piece together. You're trying to find out what you can find out. The news information slows down. There's not much happening. Obviously, this off season is going to be a little bit different with a lawsuit. Obviously, the changing of the team. Basically, we're going to have a almost brand new team next year. And so some of that's exciting, but as we're kind of getting into we're still at the beginning of the off season. It's going to be a little slow, but we're excited, man. Let's go.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of new pieces to dig into. Then you got the spring portal session coming up. Right. So that'll be exciting as well. And of course, like I know this isn't the meat and potatoes for a lot of people, but softball's coming up and baseball's coming up as well, just to kind of get us, tied over to the football season when it comes around. And, I know a lot of people, whether you like the round ball sports of Florida State or you're just a Florida State football person, you have to appreciate what the softball team has done. So you've got to be excited about them.
They're going to look good this year.
They're looking really good. And I think baseball is going to have a bounce back year as well. We are planning a show hopefully next week where we can kind of dig into those a little bit. So if that is your cup of tea, make sure to be in tune for that, because I'm just all Florida State. I don't really have any rooting interest outside of it. And, I try to root for basketball, but it's like 1 minute they're good. The next minute they're not. They're like giving UNC all they want, and then they blow the lead in the second half. So it's just, my blood pressure can't handle that. So, so let's go ahead and let's just start with this lawsuit update. Like we said, first off, man, it's just an insane way to do business. When you talk about the ACC as a whole and the way this whole thing's going. Now, first off, I should say that neither one of us are lawyers. This is not any kind of legal jargon or anything like that. And we don't have a lawyer on. There's pretty much been lawyers on just about every podcast out there to talk about this. So we're just going to summarize it between ourselves, and what we've taken from it. Now, like we said, there hasn't really been any legal action to take place yet. I know there's something that's supposed to be decided in February. I think maybe the jurisdiction or something like that, which is a huge
part. Yeah.
Right. But there has really been some developments in this. I mean, like we said, the ACC actually struck first. They came out with a lawsuit the day before Florida State filed. And then Florida State files their lawsuit. Then the ACC files an amended complaint looking for basically a blank check and damages to tie FSU's hands when it comes to decision making in the ACC. Then they fired back as well. Florida State with talking about a lot of stuff that we're going to dig into here in a second. Just a lot of mismanagement of the fiduciary duties of the conference. And then the latest update that I saw today is that Florida State has filed in Mecklenburg County up in North Carolina. They have filed to try and block them getting the record sealed for these contracts. Yeah. And man, I jokingly said earlier that like there must be they must have confessed to a murder somewhere in that grant of rights. Like there must be blood on that paperwork, because it is just unreal when you talk about how a business of that size with that many moving components is so scared of this being put out in public. But I think it's where like a great Warren Buffett quote was, "You find out who was swimming naked when the tide goes out," and I feel like they're scared of the tide going out, because they know once people get into that contract, if it becomes public, they're cooked. And I think Florida State knows that too. And I will say what's interesting is, I don't know how, if you follow this any closely, UNC made some moves the other day that
yes, they did.
They didn't say we're out of here, but they said that some some changes need to happen. Revenue gaps were mentioned. They put things in place where it sounds like, we're not sticking our foot in the door, but we're grabbing the handle.
Yeah.
And so there's been rumblings that Clemson is kind of exploring options too. Obviously, we know that in Florida with the Sunshine Law, they have to do things differently at FSU. It has to be in public.
Yeah.
But yeah, man, there's a lot of interesting back and forth legality wise of what's going on with this lawsuit. And I know you've really dug into things, so I'll kick it to you and give us the latest update.
Yeah. So let's just kind of walk back a little bit and just remember kind of how we got here. Florida State came out last summer and basically said it's unacceptable for what's happening in the conference right now. Florida State, basically the projection is that the ACC will be almost 30 to 40 million behind the SEC and the Big Ten in the next 10 years with revenue, because the ACC is in a terrible situation with their contract and the grant of rights to 2036. And so they needed to do something, right? So that kind of stirred up the pot, though we knew behind the scenes that this had already been stirring. People had been talking, the media, especially the local media, had been already kind of getting this going. Well, this was like the first time that Florida State really came out and said, this is what it is, right? So then they announced there's going to be a board meeting. And what's interesting about this, and this is one of the things that, again, as Jesse said, we're not lawyers. So we have this is not our legal expertise or anything like that. This is just based on what we've read and heard. But one of the things that a lot of lawyers are saying out there is that this actually gives Florida State the advantage in the argument about jurisdiction, because the ACC filed a lawsuit preemptively, basically meaning they anticipated that Florida State was going to file a lawsuit. So they filed a lawsuit to beat Florida State. And in most cases, most judges, if they rule based on how the law is supposed to be ruled, that you can't do that. Like you can't sue somebody in anticipation of them suing you.
Right,
I mean, you can, but like you're going to lose that. More likely than not, you're probably going to lose that jurisdiction case. And so
it's a baseless kind of deal.
Yeah,
You know
it's
what I
like,
mean?
you're only suing because somebody's suing you. And
Right.
so whether or not they win or lose that jurisdiction case, we don't know. We're not legal experts, but it does, as the experts have said out there, it does in some ways put FSU in a more favorable position to win the jurisdiction case because the ACC filed before FSU. Now, FSU had to wait till the board approve it because of they are a public university run by the Board of Governors, which is a state of Florida entity that manages these public schools. So they had to wait. They had to go and get the board's approval to do that. Okay. So the ACC filed, and they were so quick to file that they basically rushed through. They accused Florida State of trying to leave the conference. Basically, they wanted a judge to say that the grant of rights is an enforceable document, an enforceable agreement, and that if Florida State were going to leave it, they were going to have to give up all their media rights till 2036. Basically, somewhere in the middle of what if paying the exit fee and paying the penalties and paying the media rights, it's about almost over $500 million. $500 million. Well, then Florida State finally files their suit, and they're basically alleging mismanagement of the fiduciary responsibility of the conference, that the conference misled them and all the other ACC schools about kind of what was and what isn't part of like getting the network started, making the conference more profitable, all those kinds of different things that you can read in the FSU's original suit. Okay. So then basically, from what I understand, once each party files, then you have some time period, I believe, to respond to those filings. Well, the ACC, once they read FSU's filing, was basically like, what you say about my mama? Okay. Right. And then the ACC then filed an amended complaint. They basically attached onto their original filing a more in-depth, basically, we're going to start name calling and accuse FSU of, like you said, of leaking the grant of rights deal, leaking the ESPN deal. One, I don't think anyone outside FSU's lawyers has seen those documents. I know I haven't. No. I'd love to see them. So I don't know what did FSU leak, but they're complaining that, and they're saying there's damages involved in that. Basically, like you said, a blank check of those damages,
right?
And that.
And I will
Go
say
ahead.
the interesting thing is, like, how do you leak something that they have admitted you cannot copy verbatim? You
Correct.
cannot get legal copies of it. You
Correct.
literally have to go
You can't
in
take
there.
pictures.
Right. It's like the Indiana Jones Temple of Doom or whatever, just to be able to get in and view the contract. I mean,
Right.
it's insane. And so, like, I don't see how they've leaked it, but it's just, again, and I'll kick it back to you, but if they are going this far to hide something, then there's obviously something to be hidden in there.
Correct.
And I know we're going to get to that with the Swafford situation. But yeah, man, it seems crazy. Like, if they would fight for the conference and for the teams as hard as they're fighting against having themselves exposed, maybe we wouldn't be in this situation.
You've hit the nail on the head, man. I mean, you're right. It feels like we are tampering with deep, dark government secrets here.
Right.
And I feel like even saying the name, like somebody's gonna jump down from my ceiling and all black and put a thing over my head and take me away somewhere. Like, I mean, it's ridiculous of how secretive they are being, which makes you think, like you said, there's something in there or some things in there they do not want the schools to know, the public to know, whatever it may be. And so they basically are, I mean, they've put their full weight against this amended complaint. And like we were kind of talking about in our pre-show, was that, this is not the first time the ACC has been sued by another school trying to get out of the conference. If you remember, I can't remember the year, so I don't want to misquote it, but way back when Maryland was leaving the ACC to go to the Big Ten, they sued the ACC to try to get out of the conference. And while, yes, the ACC did put up a fight, it was in no way to the level that they are putting up a fight against FSU. Now, Maryland sued and basically said, which kind of lends to what FSU's amended complaint is, or complaint period is. And then the amended complaint was Maryland basically sued and said, look, the conference penalty, it's not a penalty. It's basically a restrictive measure to keep teams from leaving. And so a judge ruled that was correct, that you're right. You can't penalize a team for trying to better their situation.
Right.
And you can't penalize a team based on revenue that the conference would have never gotten anyways if the team had stayed or left, right?
Right.
And so Maryland ended up settling with the ACC on that. So that now created what the legals expert would call precedent. And now that is what Florida State's saying. Florida State is basically alleging that, one, the conference cannot, again, keep a penalty that is 3 times the operating cost of the conference. 3 times the operating cost of the conference. Okay.
Yeah.
You cannot charge, FSU saying you cannot charge that and call that a penalty. And if you can't call it a penalty, then it is a frivolous charge, therefore nullifying Florida State's liability to pay that upon exiting the conference. Like, Florida State could pay the $30 million or whatever they would have made this year. Yeah, that seems legible. But to say 3 times the conference or the conference operating costs, so that's one. The second thing is they're saying, well, your media rights are locked in by the grant of rights. And Florida State is alleging that grant of rights is not a document that can keep like, you can't, basically the conference can't keep something that doesn't belong to them. And and so Florida State basically, once ACC filed their amended complaint, Florida State said, oh, okay, so you want to talk about my mama? We're gonna open up the whole closet now. And literally, I mean, you talk about go 0 to 100 real fast. Florida State said, we were trying to be nice. We were trying to be nice and do this cordially. But you want to call somebody's mama something. So we gonna open up the whole can. And they literally went after. I mean, they went in on former ACC Commissioner John Swafford, his son Chad Swafford, and basically accused them of collusion, basically accused them of John Swafford making decisions to try to keep his son's job at Raycom. So just really quick, and I'll throw it back to you, Jesse, is before the ACC, the SEC, and there's another conference, maybe the Big 10, maybe the Big 12, one of them. They all had this deal with Raycom Sports, right? To broadcast their level, their what they call tier 2 and tier 3 rights. So they're typically sporting games that have regional appeal You know, the national appeal would go to things like ESPN,
Right.
CBS, all like that stuff. But the regional stuff like FSU versus Boston College, well, the nation didn't really care about that unless, you know, they were right. But there's regions that would. And so Raycom would work with those regions to broadcast those games, right? So those tier 2, tier 3s. So the complaint contends that the ACC schools have lost let's see, it says about $82 million each year in revenue from those rights because the conference gave a very friendly deal to Raycom. Okay. And the reason why that's important is because at the time in 2008, Chad Swafford was the business development person at Raycom. Now, Swafford, if you connect the names, is the son of John Swafford, ACC commissioner, right? And so over time, every time the ACC was negotiating deals, they required whatever TV partner they were working with that they had to work with Raycom Sports. Okay. So in 2008, the SEC sold its rights to ESPN, and they got out of the Raycom deal, right? They got out of it. And because they got out of it, like Raycom lost a lot of people, except for Chad Swafford. Now, why did they not fire Chad Swafford? Oh, maybe because the ACC renegotiated a deal with ESPN to keep Raycom in.
Right. And I think it's like when you start looking at that, you can obviously tell they're guilty because, like you said, the meetings that they've had, the names that they've said, the quotes that they've released are like, basically, there's not going to be a deal done unless it involves Raycom. And if you don't sign this extension, there will be no ACC network without Raycom involved. And like you said, when you had those conferences dump their rights with Raycom, it sounded like that was pretty much, I mean, you know, you were about to lose them and like they might go out of business. And so then you have them, you know, when it was looking like Raycom was going to go out of business at one point when they lost those media right deals with the other conference. So this was basically the way to save them. And then not only that, but he ended up getting promoted, and I believe went on to work at ESPN after that. As kind of a bigwig there as well. So the writing is on the wall that this deal stinks, and I think it's just, you know, like you said, Florida State was trying to be nice. They were trying to be like, listen, you just let us go about our way. We won't, you know, whatever. But then when they came back, it was like, okay, now we're going to pull the kid gloves off, and now we're going to start naming names. And like you said, I mean, when you're talking about costing them $82 to $83 million over that course from the loss
per year,
right, on the tier 2, tier 3 media rights, because from what I understand, they're not getting paid anything off of those.
No.
Nothing. And so there was basically no deal there was no win situation for the schools in that negotiation. And so again, I think if you can just get all this to public, which is why we so strongly believe that the one thing they don't want is to get into the discovery phase, which is why they would want to settle, because, you know, if this gets shown under light, you know, if this comes to the light, this could be it. I mean, this is like the house of cards right now, and it could all come crumbling down for the ACC. And, you know, you bring up the Maryland thing. I think the reason they're fighting Florida State so hard is because they know we're their cash cow. Like they know we dominate the media, the eyeballs. And I mean, Clemson's been good when they're good, but when they're not, they feign off as well. And so I think they know that if they lose Florida State and then say, you know, Florida State finds a way out, as long as you crack the door, you could have multiple teams go for it. Now you'll have teams like a Wake Forest that you know, maybe Virginia. I guess Virginia's got some other things going for them, but there will be some teams that may not have a landing spot, so they may not want this deal to go through.
Oh yeah,
but you know, when you're talking about teams like UNC and like Clemson and like Florida State and, you know, some of the other schools that Louisville could find a way out, and knowing, I think it's one of those you have to think ahead too. Like if you're another school and you know that the leader in eyeballs on TV sets is leaving, what's going to happen when you renegotiate? And I think the elephant in the room as well is the fact that you have the extension that could be picked up by ESPN in 2027 that they have not picked up yet.
They still have not.
Right. And so like if you leave, and why would you not do it if you could get it at that kind of basement rate, that's right, you know, really low ball offer there. So if they don't pick that up, you know, say Florida State and a couple of these teams leave and they don't have a reason to pick that up, that could be it for this conference. I mean, it could turn Right. Like, again, exactly. You could be searching for someone to carry your media rights. We were joking before the show, like, the Pac-12 was basically knocking on doors like, hey, anybody want to buy a Pac-12 game? You know what I mean? Like, you could
Well,
probably
and
get
then
a commercial on there for $20 or something. But
yeah,
it is, I think it is like, and I will say, I don't feel bad for the ACC at all in any way, shape, or form. But I will say that I kind of feel bad for the current commissioner, who is basically having to come in and fight a battle from just a completely inept, dirty, dealings that was done by the previous commissioner that basically crashed the conference to begin with. When you talk about the delay in the ACC network getting launched, and you look, I like some of the personalities on the ACC network, EJ and all those guys. I think they do a good job, but it's they don't put anything into that like they do with the SEC network. And they've been so far behind with that. The Big Ten network got launched years before the ACC network. So, I mean, they've never really been a great fiduciary for their conference members anyway. And so, like, I think it's also from Florida State's perspective, and I'll kick it back to you. I think it's also the fact that you've been screwed in the past. That is already like putting salt on the wound. But this is all a forward-thinking process. This is like, what is it going to be that, right now they're kind of hanging in there. They're able to compete on a national stage with the revenue that they have. But it's, again, you're looking at 20, 30 years, 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, when you're going to be making 30, 40 million less. And a lot of this doesn't include TV contracts that have been renegotiated for the addition of Texas and Oklahoma and all the schools that the Big Ten added. So that number's only going to get worse. And you are expected to compete against those teams. You compete against one of them every single year. And so, it's going to be interesting how this thing moves forward. The more that, I had actually heard watching some of the lawyers where it was kind of like, okay, well, Florida State's got a good case. And then when the ACC fired back the first time, it was like, the ACC doesn't have a terrible case either. But I think really when Florida State pulled the kid gloves off with this last rebuttal, it was like, okay, you're going to make us air out this dirty laundry, and we're going to make you look bad. And so now I think, like, seeing this latest update, I think that if they can substantiate any of this stuff, I think that it's over for the ACC. And I think you will, at a minimum, I think you'll see them look for some kind of negotiation on that number. Like you said, I don't see how you can lock in someone's grant of rights for an extension that hasn't been signed by the network that carries the media rights. That's insane. It should be through 2027 anyway, so that should be prorated to begin with. And then, like you said, I know they've said that the buyout is unreasonable. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense.
No,
that'd be like me going to buy a Big Mac from McDonald's, and if I don't like it, I return it. They got to give me $10,000. Like,
correct.
It's insane. It doesn't make any sense. And so if they can get those things done, Florida State, you've seen the rumors that's come out where they're looking at private equity and stuff like that, which almost in a way makes me feel like they expect a negotiation to happen. So then when it does happen, they will have the money in place to buy their way out. And so now I think it just depends on how this lawsuit shakes out, where their landing spot is. Of course, most of you guys already know you cannot make an offer. Like, it's like one of those silent offers in recruiting. You can't make a committable offer while you're still committed to another team. You can't do that. So I do believe, and I can't put any like legs behind this, but I do believe Florida State probably has a backdoor offer. I believe if they can make this happen, they know where they're going to end up. But yeah, man, it's been a pretty interesting update. With that last fireback by Florida State, I feel like if that stuff gets substantiated, the dealings with the Swaffords, man, it's going to be lights out for the ACC, and Florida State's going to find their way out. And then I think it just depends on how many other schools go with them, because, like we said, UNC, Clemson, some of these other ones. Really, I think if you're in the ACC in general, you would be really kind of inept to not explore your options, because you don't know what's going to be left over if 2 or 3 teams leave. So I think a lot of these schools are probably kind of getting the wake up call right now. Like, hey, we better start looking into this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I was thinking, well, there's a couple of things I was thinking. First, number one, you're absolutely right. Florida State leaving the ACC is much different than, look, I'm going to say this. You may not agree, those of you watching. Florida State leaving the ACC is much different than Clemson leaving the ACC. It's much different than Virginia, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Miami, any of those schools. Here's why. Because Clemson, North Carolina, Virginia Tech, Miami, all those schools, when they are good, yes, they bring eyeballs to the ACC media. When they are bad, they do not. Florida State, on the other hand, whether they're good or bad, they bring eyeballs. It's been proven. Even during the terrible COVID season, even during the 0-4, 5-3 finish of 2021, even through the 3 straight losses in 2022, they bring eyeballs. Like that is Florida State has always been the cash cow of the ACC.
Right.
So, of course, the ACC is going to fight really hard.
Right. And I was just going to say on that, keep in mind, like Florida State put out numbers, I think it was last year, again, before all this even happened. This was not a reaction to the snub and all that stuff. Florida State put out that I think it was from 2014 to 2022 that they were second in the conference in viewership as far as football goes behind Clemson. Now, keep in mind,
behind Clemson,
2014, and everybody's like, oh, Florida State cherry picked their numbers. So they left out the national championship season.
Correct.
When they cherry-picked the numbers, and they also included the worst 4 years in program history. And also keep in mind that Clemson won 2 national titles during that run.
And so, Florida State was number 2.
Right. And so like and I want to say the 2023 data, now that Clemson had a couple of, down-ish years, especially last year, Florida State passed them again. And so they are back in the lead of the conference. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, it is now. Now, I will say schools like Clemson and UNC and all that, they bring other things to the table. We talk about from a university perspective, from basketball and the other sports. But, you're 100% right. When it comes to football, which is what pays the bills.
Correct.
And I'll kick it back to you on this. UNC, in the things that they said with their board meeting and all that stuff, they said, look, we have the second most Olympic sports and like women's sports and all that non-football sports to Stanford, the second most. And Stanford's just their first year, which, goodness gracious, if you ever see like Stanford's endowment, it's unreal.
Ridiculous.
Right. But they basically said if something doesn't happen with this revenue gap, we may have to start cutting some of these sports to be able to keep up in football, because football is the cash cow.
Correct.
Football, as much as people might not like what teams put into these programs, if it isn't for football money, you wouldn't have a lot of the other sports. You wouldn't have the opportunities in women's sports that teams like Florida State, UNC, and all those have. And that's not a dig to say that they don't work hard and they don't compete on the field and it's not as exciting to watch. It's eyeballs on TV sets. That is what it is. And so, yeah man, it's huge. Football is the revenue driver, and Florida State, by all means, is the lead in the conference. And when you look at Florida State and Clemson, number 3. And I'd have to look up the 2023 data, but number 3 is not even close. I think when I did the research before, from like 2022 or 2021, the next closest was like 43rd.
Yeah,
under $1 million. It's not even close. So yeah, it'll be interesting.
Well, and then here's what I'll say to kind of bring us to close to this segment with the lawsuit is you talk about how, I mean, it makes no sense that they're trying to sue Florida State for damages for confidentiality break. Well, like, I mean, Florida State basically came out and said nowhere did the ACC or ESPN have Florida State sign a confidentiality agreement. It's not even in the Gore. It's not in anywhere. So Florida State didn't break anything confidentiality, anything confident that was supposed to be hidden. Florida State didn't do that. Now, the other reason, this is my tinfoil hat, that Florida State's going after John Swofford is because I hope this gets to discovery for that, because what ends up getting subpoenaed is his emails. Yeah. And I would love to see those emails.
Oh, man.
What he said to his son, what they talked about, because, they keep all that on record. Right. So that's why it was very smart. Now, again, I'm not a legal expert, but I would imagine that's why it was very smart for Florida State to add John Swofford to the amended complaint, because now he becomes a part of this, right? And so all those emails are going to get subpoenaed during discovery and all like that stuff if they get there. And I think if I'm the ACC, I'm just like, okay, wow, this could get really bad for us. We might want to, cut bait and get what we can get.
And there may be some, where people have to come in and testify, and that's legal. And, are you going to put your butt on the line, your freedom on the line,
right,
for the conference? Probably not. And so, yeah, man, I think that is really interesting because, part of me wonders, like, if you're Florida State and they offer you a deal. Like, okay, this is we'll, it's a $500 million or whatnot, all in to get out of here. If they come back and they're like, all right, I tell you what, 250 million or whatever, you can get out of here. Part of me almost wonders if you're Florida State, like, knowing what you feel like, if you feel like you have a rock solid case, do you take that or do you push it to trial and maybe you can get this nullified altogether? I mean, I guess maybe you take the guaranteed deal versus, potentially having to pay $500 million to get out. But man, I mean, if the amount of inept like collusion and stuff that it sounds like went on with these deals, it almost feels like Florida State should just keep pushing this thing and almost try and just crash the whole
Get
party on the
zero.
way out the door. Right. Like, it feels like that's what they should do. And so
Yeah.
it'll be interesting how it plays out. Like I said, I know there's that February 16th date where there will be some things decided. So, once things kind of actually start happening, again, this is really just pushing paperwork back and forth. That
Right.
nothing has been legally decided yet. So when that does happen, we'll be sure to update you guys as well. But man, it's looked like this is a pretty good, this is a primetime matchup right now.
Primetime matchup.
This is a 7:30 ABC game between Florida State and the ACC right now. So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out. But so the next thing I want to talk about,
hopefully Jeff Flanagan isn't the referee, because
oh man, that's going to be some home cooking there. But maybe, I mean, the thing is too, like, if you get UNC involved, that's huge, because it is a Tobacco Road conference, and if you get one of the homeboys, so to speak, like one of the OG ACC members, to really start looking around, going, what are we doing here?
Right.
And there's been a lot of smoke that the Big Ten would love UNC, just from the school perspective.
There's a lot of smoke that the SEC would love UNC.
Right. And so if those schools get highly coveted, it's all fun and games till they start showing you some checks. And you're like, wait a minute. So I like the ACC, but we could get 30, 40 million somewhere else. That's huge. And at the end of the day, they have to do what's best for their university, which is what Florida State's trying to do for theirs. So I think, once money talks, you may see some of these other guys that are like, you know what, screw it. I'll throw the match. You dump the gas, I'll throw the match. We're out of here.
Yeah.
So we'll see how it plays out coming up, but we'll keep you guys updated on all that as well. Again, not legal advice, just kind of our thoughts after reading through some things as well. So the next thing, Michael, I want to talk about, there are some rumors here with the spring game. Now, nothing has been officially, they'll probably announce it, because you know how things go for us on our luck. They'll announce it while we're recording. But the spring game has been rumored to be on the weekend of April 20th. It is going to be in Doak Campbell Stadium. I'm a little disappointed that every year it seems like, man, all we want is for you to schedule this where there's a home baseball or softball series, and they just keep whiffing on that. I don't know what the deal is, but I know some people were questioning whether it was going to be in Doak or not, basically because of the construction. And so it is going to be at Doak. That is a known thing. It's just the date has been pretty much said by a few of the major outlets. It just hasn't been confirmed by Florida State yet. So if you want to mark your calendars for that. And that brings me to the next topic, is a little bit of the stadium talk here. Obviously, you guys can go on, check out the Earth Cams and see, how Doak looks right now. It might make you a little sad. They're tearing that thing up, but I know, you either love it or you hate it. And I don't love all the renovations. I will say, I think there are improvements that needed to be made. Bathrooms, concessions, the underbelly of the stadium. Please put in some Wi-Fi. Michael Alfred, if you're listening, just give us some decent Wi-Fi. Give the people what they want. I'm not a huge fan of like the walkout bar and stuff like that behind I don't love that, but at the same time, I understand that there are things that had to be done for ADA requirements, handrails, widening of seats, and everything like that. So Alfred did say in 2024, the capacity is expected to be mid to high 50,000s. Now that's a big step back. It's going to be interesting too. Like, you got Clemson at home and all that stuff, and you're only going to have around a 55,000 capacity. It's not ideal. Now we were talking before the show, you look at places like Virginia Tech and NC State and some of these other schools outside of Clemson. Miami has 15 people at a home game. But when you look at some of the quote unquote better atmospheres in the ACC, a lot of those are 60,000-ish seat stadiums. So it can still be loud just by the way Doak is constructed. Now, I don't know how, like if they have any open spots in the stands, how that'll go. But then they did say it will be back into the 70,000 capacity range in 2025. So it will go back up. It's just going to be that kind of 1 year. And, a lot of people said, why couldn't we get this done in the offseason? Because this is a major renovation. This is not they're not putting in a couple new bathrooms and some new bleachers. They are really overhauling the stadium. So that's going to be something to see, and I'm excited for it. I mean, I think it's going to be a newer and better product. And look, the thing is, like, I'm sure Michael Alfred, if he was on here, he would agree. As much as we love the old school feel of Doak, the aluminum bleachers crowding 80,000 people in there, shaking the stadium, we all love that. Look, man, HD TVs are cheap now, and
that's right.
And it's only getting more expensive to go to games. So you have to give some of these people, creature comforts to get them out of their house to come to games. Attendance has been declining in college football, not just Florida State, for a long time. So I think some of these will help. Now, there was a lot of sellouts last year, but the team's good, and you want people there regardless of whether it's an undefeated season or not. Now, being that we're talking about the stadium developments, I just want to touch on, man, Florida State is really – it feels like Florida State's making some boss moves. And so I'm excited to see all this stuff happen. I mean, one, you have the stadium renovations that are underway. There's been a lot of pictures coming out of the new construction on the new football-only facility. That is really getting going. I know that, they announced it. They did the groundbreaking. It had been a while since the groundbreaking, so people are kind of like, what's the holdup here? What's taking so long? They're really getting moving on this thing. You also see the staff are going around and they're traveling and recruiting in some private jets. And Norvell, like, I guess he saw on Twitter, like, the helicopter wars that went back and forth. Everybody's like, who's got the bigger helicopter,
right?
Or whatnot. And so, like, Norvell is pulling up in this really nice helicopter now. So, like, yeah, man, it's Florida State's pushing their chips in, man. They are really doing what they got to do to compete at a high level. Obviously, we know they locked up Mike Norvell, paying him as one of the highest paid coaches in college football. And they even had the board of trustees meeting today where they said they had talked about they were really excited to retain him, but they know that also comes with some additional investments in the football program. So, again, I think if you want to tie that back to the lawsuit, you could say that I don't think they would be doing all of these things if they didn't know that there was going to be some extra revenue on the back end to make up for that, because, some of the stuff isn't just a bump in attendance isn't going to pay for all this stuff. So I you can read the writing on the wall there. But yeah, man, I'm just excited really to see Florida State just really going all in on competing at a high level with all the new construction, the jets and all that stuff. Plus, I mean, man, it's amazing to see the ground they cover. Like they're literally in like Texas one night, Alabama for lunch. It's like they're doing so many things, that are huge. And so I definitely want to, I definitely want to get your thoughts on that. And then we do have a little bit of breaking news that we will touch on in just a second. That is unfortunate, but we will touch on that in just a second. But I'll let you share your thoughts on kind of some of the stuff that's going around right now with everything that they're doing. And, just Florida State's pushing it all in, man. And I'm excited to see it.
Yeah, they're not messing around. They've said, like, look, football is a big deal. And we understand that football is the revenue generator, the revenue driver. All the other sports, all the other round ball sports that Florida State has, the Olympic sports, they're great, man. Our softball team's been great. Baseball historically has been great. All the other sports have been awesome. Basketball, has had its ups and downs. But the thing that drives everything, that drives even more students signing up and applying to Florida State is football. And so, when they were already very serious about football when Michael Alford became the AD, like they stopped being a hoarder and a conservative spender. And they were like, okay, we're going to have to spend in order to get this thing where we needed to get to. Well, then it was not that I don't think Florida State was like still kind of holding off on some of that. I really think they had their foot to the pedal. But when the chance of losing Mike Norvell to Alabama became like a reality, it was like they like put the jets on, they put nitrous in the gas tank, and they said, all right, we're all the way in. And I mean, they upped the recruiting. That was the biggest thing. I don't necessarily, Mike was making already around $8 million or something like that. Right. I don't necessarily think the money to pay to him was as big of a deal. I think that's probably a small portion of that. I mean, he is now one of the top 10 high paid coaches in the country. But I think more so it was the recruiting budget, the infrastructure budget, getting more staff, more support staff in play. I mean, we're going to talk about this later with Rick Stockstill coming back. But I mean, just things like that. The football only facility getting, starting to get broken out, and the pictures, the images that thing's going to look like, it's going to be absolutely amazing. The the helicopter wars, like getting
Right.
those things so that Mike Norvell can have the advantages that Alabama has. You know, here's the thing. Alabama has a not so great NIL structure. That was one of the things that kind of shocked me coming out of this whole saga of if Mike Norvell will go to Alabama or not, was discovering that Alabama's NIL thing is not very good. But what Alabama has that is above Florida State is they have the history, they have the SEC, they have that money, so they have the resources. Yes, they had Nick Saban; he was a big part of that, and so it'll be interesting to see what they look like going forward. But Mike Norvell, he just wanted the same resources so that he could do what
Right.
he and everybody else wants to. And so, yeah, it's so good to see Florida State step up into those things. Now, when it comes to the stadium, you know, listen, I love the days when Florida State could fit almost 83,000 people in that thing. That was glorious. I mean, it was, there was a time where Florida State went 54 straight home games before losing a game, you know? And so I get, you know, with the ADA updates that have to be done, I get with the fan amenities that needs to be done to create, because, you know, like you said, plasma or LED TV is so cheap now, you can stay home and still have just as great clarity, not spend all the money to go. And so they're trying to up the fan experience. You know, next year is going to be interesting. You know, I have season tickets, so I'll be there, you know, 50 something thousand people. You know, we'll see how it goes. I think in the long run, I think the final stadium capacity is supposed to be somewhere in the 60s, I believe, high 60s, I think. And so, it'll be different. But, you know, this is the age of college football that we're in. And, you know, I understand it. I'm not a huge fan of it, but I understand it.
Yeah. And I honestly think, man, like there won't be a lot of new stadiums built. I mean, we just know that because most, like you've seen someone where like USF wants to build on campus.
Right.
You know, Miami, who knows? You know, they could probably just play in their basketball
That's
stadium
right.
or whatever. But like, I don't know that you're going to see many more 100,000, 90,000 seat stadiums built. There hasn't really been a lot of teams that have added on to stadiums. A lot of them do go reduce capacity just because it is the nature of it. And Tallahassee is a hard place to get to. I wish the university would build about, you know, 2 or 3 hotels that didn't price gouge you, that you had to take out a second mortgage just to get to. Yeah, man, but I think overall, like it's going to be good in the long run. I work, like I said, I'm not a fan of all of it. I hope, because the Champions Club, it's a little bit of an embarrassment on TV. There's never anybody sitting out there watching it. So I just hope it doesn't end up the new additions become like that. But at the same time, I do think that, you know, you got to give people a little bit more, especially students, especially young kids now. Like they want Wi-Fi. They want to be able to post on social media. You know, I mean, it is what it is. Like I know most of us, we're not worried about our phone at the game, but you know, when you're a college level kid, you want to be, you know, Snapchatting or TikToking or whatever they do. Gosh, I sound old when I say that. But you know, it is just the reality of it. And like I said, I think that it's more of a plan for the future, knowing where things are going. But, you know, they're pushing their chips all in on getting this football program back to where it was. And you touched on it. I mean, there for a while, they had some financial issues. They had to, you know, from Stan Wilcox, really put this program behind with paying for all this stuff. And so you brought in the interim AD and all that. And they did a good job of getting Florida State back to where they needed to be. They generated over $10 million surplus 2 years in a row. I know they were a little bit at a deficit last year, but you also have to keep in mind they're spending a lot of money now. So you're going to be at a little bit of a deficit, but that's what gets you on that next level. Like you talked about with Alabama. Now we probably have a better NIL situation than Alabama,
right?
But go look at their facilities.
Oof,
I mean, you can find it on YouTube. They are second to none. Now I think NIL is, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, it may have been more important to have those facilities. Right. Now you probably want to sink as much as you can into NIL, but the facilities are still part of it. I mean, not everybody's after money. So there is that part too. And then it also comes with expanding the off the field staff, which we're going to talk about in just a second with a recent hire that Florida State brought in. But as we touched on a second ago, unfortunately, there has been some news that was kind of mildly expected, but still very heartbreaking to have to share with you guys. Mike Martin Sr., legendary Florida State baseball coach, has passed away. There was the announcement that he went into hospice care recently, and, you know, that usually means the end is near. So prayers out to the Martin family, Carol and Mike Martin Jr., you know, just that whole family, the things that he did for Florida State baseball. And, you know, unfortunately, that he never got to win a championship, but that still doesn't mean that he didn't turn that into one of the most respected baseball programs, in the NCAA. And so I think you just really have to take a second to honor his legacy and what he did. Florida State has been, I will say this, Florida State has been really, really fortunate in our time to have some absolutely legendary coaches. I mean, you had, of course, Bobby Bowden, Mike Martin Sr., even Leonard Hamilton. I mean, a long tenured guy. I know the success is kind of here or there with basketball, but still, you've had some really great guys who did things the great way, the right way. And that's something that Mike Martin really embodied. He just had that Bobby feel about him. He was a very kind man. He was very friendly, very generous with his time, always open to the media, and just loved his players. And so it is unfortunate to hear about his passing. Obviously, that is a big loss for the Florida State community. And we just obviously want to send our prayers and well wishes to the entire Mike Martin family and the FSU baseball community, because I know that it's a really big loss for everybody in and around Tallahassee.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Mike Martin was a legend in his own right. Beyond just what he did for the baseball program, which, has been well documented. I mean, it was incredible manager, baseball coach, so many College World Series appearances. Yeah, gosh, you always had wished that he could have got that one. I think he had taken them to like 17, in his time, and just always so close and never could get him over the hump. But more so, I never got a chance to meet him, but more so than his coaching acumen. You always heard about just how genuine of a person he was, how kind he was, how loving he was and caring he was, not only for his players, but for people he would meet. He was the kindest person to strangers. I never heard a bad word about Mike Martin Sr. And so, yeah, to the Martin family, our prayers and thoughts are going out to you guys. And, we just hope that you feel comforted in this season as you mourn the loss of an incredible person.
Yeah. And to be honest, man, if it wasn't for Mike Martin, I probably wouldn't even be a Florida State fan, because really how, and some of you have heard me tell the story, like how this all started was my brother used to go to Mike Martin baseball camp during, in the summers and whatnot. And so I was too young to attend the camp. Yeah. So while he was there at Mike Martin baseball camp, my dad would take me over to look at the football stadium. Wow. And so that's how I fell in love with Florida State. So, realistically, like if I trace it all the way back to being 10 years old, Mike Martin is probably the reason I'm a Florida State fan and talking to you guys on this podcast in the first place. So, I was always a big fan of his. That last run that they made at the NCAA tournament, getting out to the College World Series, it was just a magical run when they beat LSU and they beat Georgia, and then they got a win over Arkansas in the World Series. And, you were just hoping that he could get it done. But, man, it's just such an incredible and influential member of the Florida State community. So, obviously, again, our thoughts and prayers go out to the family. So, it's kind of hard to transition away from that, because it is sad to think about, and, just the legendary coaches that we've had. It just makes you think of when Bowden passed and how, how it hurt your heart to lose such an amazing human being. But the last thing that we did hint at a little bit that I want to touch on before we get out of here is two other little things we'll touch on real quick. Speaking of coaches and drawing it back to people who have had ties for a long time to the community, Florida State did hire Rick Stockstill. I'm sure most of you guys saw this as an offensive analyst. This is a hire that I'm excited about. Now, he did play quarterback at Florida State under Bobby Bowden from 77 to 81. So he is no-blooded. That's right. That part I do like. And now I know some people are probably going to go, he did get fired from Middle Tennessee and had just north of a 500 record there. But, Middle Tennessee is a really hard place to put some things together. It's funny, like for those of you who are still waiting on an NCAA football game to come out, I have like
That's right.
I have like a 15-year dynasty run with Middle Tennessee State, because I try and pick like the most unsuspecting college out there. And I used to always use Middle Tennessee State or whatnot to come up with. So, yeah, I mean, it's a hard program to win at. But the thing is, like, first off, you get a guy who knows how to beat Miami. We saw that. So shout out to him for that. Hung 45 on that defense.
Yes, he did. And he said we beat their butts.
Right. And he was not shy about saying it afterwards, which I loved. And keep in mind, too, like speaking of the coaching stuff that we just talked about, when he did that, and I believe for the whole season, he had the Bobby emblem on his helmet. Yeah. His hat. So, like, he definitely, he loves the university. 18 years as the head coach at Middle Tennessee State, 2-time Sun Belt Coach of the Year, 1-time Conference USA Coach of the Year, long-time Clemson assistant from 89 to 02, had a few other stops there. He has over 40 years of coaching experience, 18 years as a head coach. So, this is just one of those hires, Michael, I think where like you get a guy that you can come in. Again, it's like, are we following the Saban dynamics now where you get ex-head coaches to come in?
Yep.
And I think you have a veteran voice.
Yeah.
You have a guy who wants to be here. I mean, obviously he's going to want to come back. And he said after he beat Miami, like, a lot of his former teammates were there for that game. He got a lot of calls and text messages from the Florida State community. So obviously he's still in touch with a lot of those guys. Yeah. And so I'm sure he's got to be excited. They got to be excited to see him come back. But I think it's a veteran trusted voice with a lot of experience that you can bring in to kind of just help as an off-field analyst, someone that Mike Norvell can trust. He's very big in the pass game. They are very pass heavy at Middle Tennessee State. I was looking it up earlier. They had a couple of top 35 passing offenses during his time there, which, again, when you're Middle Tennessee, that's looking pretty good. So, overall, man, I think that he's just going to be a good voice in the room. Obviously, I don't think this is going to be something that's like a groundbreaking hire. He's not going to call plays or be a game day coach or anything like that. But I do think this is a good hire from a guy who is Noble-blooded and has just a boatload of experience. I mean, this guy has been a coach in general, because I know he started back at Bethune-Cookman in like 83, I think. This guy's been coaching football almost as long as Mike Norvell's been alive. So, you got to be excited about this hire.
Yeah. I think he brings a wealth of knowledge to the room there. It's another asset for Alex Atkins and Tony Tokras and Mike Norvell and that offensive staff to have another brain to help them scheme, help them not only just scheme and scout future opponents, but then also, part of that offensive scouting, I imagine, is looking at other offenses around the league, around the country, and around the college football. And as you're looking at other offenses around the country, and you're looking at these players who are getting in and playing and stuff like that, it's another eye to say, if that player enters the transfer portal, we might want to keep an eye on that, right? So it's another one of those. Also, Mike Norvell is an offensive genius, and to have another offensive-minded person come on that support staff to help Mike think even bigger and better of how to leverage these players, how to use them, how to grow them, how to develop them. I mean, that's going to be awesome. Though he can't do any on-the-field coaching or anything like that, man, you talk about practices, you talk about all those things where this guy has 40 years of knowledge around the game, and it's going to be huge. And another data point for Mike Norvell to bounce ideas off, because he, has been a head coach for 18 years, to help Mike think through all these things. This is what Nick Saban created at Alabama. What made him so successful is that he had the support staff to be able to do all the things that he didn't have time to do so that he could focus on what was most important. I mean, Nick Saban was 72 doing circles around some of these head coaches, And so Mike is setting himself up. This is why it was so important to retain Mike. This was why it's so important to get the resources so that Mike could get people in here like this who would allow him to do the job he needs to do so Florida State can continue the climb to be on top of college football. So I'm excited for it. Love Rick Stockhill. Glad to have him back home.
Yeah, exactly. And I know he's excited as well. And I mean, it says, I was just looking him up. He's 66, so he's a little seasoned. He's a little long in the tooth, but he's still a young guy. So I'm sure, he'll be welcome to stay, as long as he wants until he can get, I'm sure he's going to probably maybe look at another opportunity, but maybe at that point, maybe you just kind of ride it out in Tallahassee for a little bit. But I do think this is a good hire for the staff. And then the last thing I want to touch on before we get out of here is just, most of you guys monitor social media. You've probably seen a lot of this stuff being talked about out there. Is this the Senior Bowl prep that you've seen from different things, the East-West Shrine Bowl and all that stuff, man? Florida State guys have been absolutely dominating. Now, I got to say this in two different ways. One, this is exciting because you always want to see these guys do well in everything they do. They are Seminoles. They worked hard to get this program to where it is. Obviously, this is going to help, at least most of these guys should help bump their draft stock up a little bit, because this is one where you're going against, it's good on good in a lot of these.
Right.
So that part does help as well. So I'm excited to see these guys do good. I mean, I've seen clips where Fabian Lovett and Braden Fisk were unblockable at times.
Oof.
Johnny Wilson is just terrorizing defenders out there. You've also seen Jaheim Bell make some great plays, and Renardo Green and Jerrion Jones has been great in coverage. So you have just seen, player after player after player. Even Jordan Travis hasn't been able to participate, but he's
Right.
there, and that's nice too.
Yeah.
You've seen the staff out there supporting all these guys, so
Yeah.
that is great. So I'm extremely excited to see these guys because I think if you can raise your draft stock and look for whatever it's worth, for what people want to say, you can be mad or happy about whatever they did. When you see a guy like Jaheim Bell or Johnny Wilson able to get healthy for a month or two and not risk whatever they would have risked playing in that bowl game, and to go out and show out in these types of things, that's why they did it, guys. Yes, I would love to have them play in that game, but they're doing things that are the best interest for their career. And why I think that's exciting is if you can see Florida State put 6, 8, 10, 12 guys maybe in the NFL. That is massive for recruiting because, a lot of people talked about with the Alabama thing. Once they lost Saban and things probably weren't as solidified as they thought they were going to be with people leaving and stuff like that. They were like, look, man, people came here to play for Nick Saban. People came here because it's a pipeline to the NFL. And the Durajayi kid from West Virginia.
Look at you.
I still like Big Tommy, so we're going to go with Big Tommy. He even made some comments today in a press conference that that's why he came here, because you look at the guys that are in the NFL now, and he knows that this staff, JP and Odell, one of the goats of development at the defensive tackle position, can turn them into that type of NFL player to have a long, sustaining career, because NIL money's fun.
Yeah.
But, NFL money is life-changing.
Life-changing.
And that can set your family up for generational wealth. So it is great to see these guys. And if they can put all these guys into the league, that is going to really help on the recruiting trail, where that's really kind of the one thing that the staff has not yet been able to hang their hat on. You've had 1 or 2 guys, but if you could put like 6, 8, 10, man, that's going to be huge. Now, I'll kick it back to you on this. This is equally frustrating to watch, because you're seeing Florida State guys throw around Michigan offensive linemen. You're seeing Johnny Wilson cooking UGA DBs in one-on-ones. Now, I know one-on-ones is more of a sterile situation. But still. It's not a full-on game situation. But you see what these guys are doing against high-level competition, and it just makes you mad, man, because, again, every time I try and get over the CFP snub situation, it just keeps coming back one way or the other. And it just makes you realize that, if they had got in, man, I'm telling you, they could have really given teams fits. I'm not saying they would have won without Jordan Travis. With Jordan Travis, you'll never convince me that they wouldn't have. But, man, just seeing these guys, the starters that apparently didn't matter to every other fan base or whatever.
Right.
To see them go out and dominate other team starters that were in the playoffs, or some of the better teams like Georgia and them, man, it just leaves you wondering, you know what I mean? Again, you're just mad all over again, because you're like, if these guys had played and made it into the playoffs, I don't doubt that they would have made a huge difference, and they would have made some noise.
Yeah, it's like the gum on the bottom of your shoe, man. No matter how much you try to scrape it off and rub ice on it and do all those things, it's just still there. It's just like, oh, I know. And I'm with you. I get on Twitter and I'm just watching all these highlights of like you said, the FSU players at the Senior Bowl. I mean, just dominating, just flat out. I mean, that one where Johnny Wilson beat the dude off the line and then caught that a finger catch, not a hand catch, a finger catch.
Right.
And you're like, what the heck? That is ridiculous. Fabian, I mean, you saw Braden Fisk. You saw what he did against Louisville, against Florida. You saw the dominance there, with Ricardo Green, all those guys. You saw that, and you're just like, man, again, the College Football Invitational Committee just screwed Florida State out of a chance to prove that it belonged there. It deserved a chance. Texas didn't deserve a chance. Alabama didn't deserve a chance. Florida State did. And it's just it's still maddening. It feels like a wound that you've had for years, and it will continue to feel like that. It's not as upsetting as it once was earlier in December, but it's still just there. But again, kudos to what you're seeing though is just the development. Kudos to that staff. I mean, you're just seeing the clear development that's happening, and you're right. If you can put 9 to 12 guys in the NFL, you have a couple go in the first round with I think you have surefire first rounders in Jared Verse and Keon Coleman. I think last I heard, Coleman was looking somewhere between 15 and 20 is his range there. And and I thought I heard Verse was somewhere between 5 and 15. So if you
Right.
can get those 2 first rounders, you get a couple, second or third rounders, some fourth and fifth rounders there, then it's huge. Not necessarily in the high school ranks, because you're still trying to develop high school recruiting and stuff like that, but you're getting better. Let's say that you're getting better. Where it's really big is that those really, really good portal players, it's another data point for them to say, man, if I hit the transfer portal and I actually have NFL aspirations, not
Right.
that I want to be in the NFL, but I actually have the ability to be there, and I just need one more year of good development. Where are you going? Again, Florida State. I mean, just over and over again, you have those players. Florida State's proven constantly to do that. So I'm happy for them. I hope they get drafted and have great careers, and hopefully we're putting a whole nother 12 in the NFL next year.
Exactly. I'm excited to see how it plays out because, I mean, like you said, if you can build that pipeline and then you can back it up with NIL too, where if you're
Yeah.
a transfer and you can give them everything another school can give them
Yeah.
and then some, that's just
Yeah.
going to make you a destination. And I think that has a lot to do too with, not to bring up old wounds because it's kind of traveling down that path, but I think that's why Jimbo had so much success at Florida
Yeah.
State. A
Yeah.
lot of that was because, I mean, that entire 2013 team got drafted, and so it's like, or at least played in the NFL. So
Yeah.
when you saw that, it's like people knew they could put you
Yeah.
in. That's why Saban was so successful.
Yeah.
And so I do think that it will pay off as well. And so yeah, man, I'm just excited to see these guys showing out in these games, and I'm excited to see where their draft prospects go, and hopefully we send a lot of them to the league because I know that'll be big for the program. And
Yeah.
Michael, again, man, I swear I leave myself a note and I always forget. But before we jump out of here, the last thing I want to let you guys know is about today's sponsor. Of course, you can read it on the screen if you're watching on YouTube, and that is Alumni Hall. Talking about stadium renovations and new things like that. They actually have a new location in Tallahassee that's going to be better suited to serve you. And I've seen some pictures of it already. It's open and ready to go, and it is jam-packed with Knoll gear. It's at 1415 Timber Lane Road and in the Market Square Shopping Center. You guys make sure to go check them out. That's Alumni Hall FSU. You can also shop online, pick up in store. You can shop online and have it sent to your door, so you don't have to leave the couch to get some new FSU gear. Spring games coming up. You might want to check out what they got. I know they usually have some good deal, like some 2 for 38 t-shirts. That's what I got on now. That's where I picked this one up from. So make sure you go check those guys out. Whether you shop online or in store, you can get 10% off your entire order by using code SPEAR. So again, thank you to them for sponsoring us, and thank you guys for supporting those that support us. If you've watched this long, if you don't mind, we would love a like and subscribe and share this to help us reach other FSU fans like yourself. So again, guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We will be back next week, with hopefully a preview on some round ball sports here, as well as if there's any more football updates or anything like that. And on the last note, before we get out of here, again, I just want to emphasize our support and prayers for the Mike Martin family, because I know this is a tough time for them. Even if you know it's coming, it never makes it easy. And he is an absolute legend in Tallahassee. So I know there's a lot of heavy hearts today, including ours as well. So on that note, guys, just well wishes to all of them. And thank you so much for tuning in. As always, we will catch you guys on the next one. Go Noles.